Top 3 bands Lou Reed hated the most. Lou Reed was the lead singer and songwriter for the Velvet Underground on 4 of their 5 albums, and while their discography pales in comparison to those of most other 60s rock legends, their legacy remains strong as a group that influenced many bands and genres that emerged years after they disbanded. Reed was both an artistic exhibitionist and an intensely private man, a restless experimental soul and an ardent fan dedicated to the most elemental, even conservative, principles of rock and roll, a writer with the highest literary aspirations and a guitarist with a boundless love of distortion and noise. After 6 years and 4 albums with the Velvet Underground, Reed embarked on a solo career, in which he continued to challenge prevailing forms with breakthrough albums such as Berlin, 1973, Metal Machine Music, 1975, and Magic and Loss, 1992. Reed's lyrics examine taboo adult subjects, extreme lifestyles, and the urban underground. Speaking of Reed's groundbreaking work, David Bowie said, "The nature of his lyric writing had been hitherto unknown in rock. He supplied us with the street and the landscape, and we peopled it." In fact, Reed claims he had very few musical influences and liked nobody on the music scene. The Vintage interview offers some great insights into Reed's philosophy on music as he explains, "What I wanted to do was write rock and roll that you could listen to as you got older, and it wouldn't lose anything. It would be timeless in the subject matter and the literacy of the lyrics." Lou Reed never knowingly undersold his view of his place in the world, his talent and where the rest of us stood in relation to him. He also wasn't shy about sharing his honest thoughts about many of his contemporaries. And that applied to fellow musicians, most of whom he at best didn't like but usually despised. Here are top 3 bands that Lou Reed hated the most. Number 1. The Doors. The Doors' arrival on the rock scene in 1967 marked not only the start of a string of hit singles and albums that would become Stone classics, but also of something much bigger and unique connection with their audience. Unlike many of their contemporaries who sang about peace and love, the Los Angeles quartet dared to challenge, confront, and inspire their fans, diving fearlessly into darker themes. Despite having many imitators, no other band has ever quite matched their essence. Even 50 years after their debut, the Doors' music and legacy continue to exert a powerful influence. Ever since his early Velvet Underground days, Reed's attitude to the Doors had been one of antipathy, symptomatic of his mistrust of the West Coast scene in general. Reed's basic argument was that the VU were really, really smart and the California bands were really, really stupid. It was purely a matter of brains. This animosity was most likely aggravated by the VU's West Coast debut at the Trip, LA's hip nightspot, in May 1966, where the Velvets were jeered. Cher was quoted in the next day's paper as saying the VU's music will replace nothing. The Doors were the epitome of pretentious California rock. They were just painfully stupid and pretentious, and when they did try to get arty, it was worse than stupid rock and roll, Reed told PBS. "What I mean by stupid, I mean, like, the Doors," he continued, making it painfully clear which Golden State band he wanted to call out. And speaking in a more general sense, Reed wasn't a fan of the Bay Area psychedelics hippie bands, as he revealed in the same 70s interview where he shared his thoughts on various acts. "We had vast objections to the whole San Francisco scene," he said. "It's just tedious, a lie, and untalented. They can't play, and they certainly can't write. People like the Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, all those people are just the most untalented bores that ever came up." Number 2. The Who. The Who are a British rock group that was among the most popular and influential bands of the 1960s and 70s. They became known for their high-energy live shows. Many people believe that The Who are the greatest live band of all time. The Who rose to fame in the United Kingdom with a series of top 10 hit singles including I Can't Explain, The Kids Are Alright, My Generation, Who Are You, and Love Reign O'er Me. Their fame grew with memorable shows at the Monterey Pop and Woodstock music festivals. Tommy, released in 1969, was the first in a series of top 10 albums in the United States. Though primarily inspired by American rhythm and blues, The Who took a bold step toward defining a uniquely British rock vernacular in the 1960s. Shunning the Beatles' idealized romance and the Rolling Stones' cocky swagger, The Who rejected pretension and straightforwardly dealt with teenage travails. At a time when rock music was uniting young people all over the world, The Who were friendless, bitter outsiders. In 1960's The British Invasion had a massive global impact, with bands like the Rolling Stones, The Who, and the Kinks spearheading this youth-driven cultural revolution. Meanwhile, in the United States, the folk revival and hippie culture were also rising to prominence, reflecting a broad interest in artistic innovation and renewal. Amidst the creative underground of New York, populated by figures like Andy Warhol and his intriguing entourage, Lou Reed also emerged. Lou Reed, one of the most influential American musicians, was known for his strong opinions and didn't shy away from criticizing his peers. Throughout his career, he made sharp remarks about other influential bands of his time, including the Beatles and The Who. The Who, who emerged around the same time as the Velvet Underground, achieved significantly greater commercial success. They became one of Britain's leading bands, defining an era with hits like My Generation and I Can't Explain. However, Reed was not fond of the English rockers, once expressing his disdain for their 1969 rock opera, Tommy. In a mid-70s interview, he sarcastically remarked, "Tommy is such, Jesus, how people get sucked into that." He went on to say, "So talentless, and as a lyricist, Pete Townsend is, so profoundly untalented, and, philosophically boring to say the least." Despite Reed's criticism, Tommy became one of The Who's most successful works, leading to several spin-offs, including a film directed by Ken Russell. This success may have contributed to Reed's aversion to the group. Known for his love of subversion, Reed likely viewed the popular group's celebrated rock opera as straying too far from the core principles of rock and roll that he cherished. Number 3, The Beatles. Who doesn't like the Beatles? Since 1963, the Beatles have been acclaimed as outstanding musicians. Indeed, they were a band whose influence and popularity stretched across multiple generations. New generations of listeners continue to fall in love with the band. They can't win everyone over, though. Many people dislike the band, including a number of other musicians. Lou Reed was one of those individuals who had no love for the Fab Four. Reed's audible disdain as he dismisses what the world considers the best rock and roll band is clear. "I never liked the Beatles. I thought they were garbage. If you ask, who did you like? I liked nobody." By 1987, however, Reed's view of the Beatles was far less sympathetic. Indeed, the passing of the punk age must have left the musician with a case of musical amnesia because, in one interview, he could barely fathom the idea of liking the music of the Beatles. Comparing the Liverpool group's output to that of the Velvets, Reed said, "From my point of view, the other stuff couldn't come up to our ankles, not up to my kneecap, not up to my ankles, the level we were on, compared to everyone else. I mean, they were just painfully stupid and pretentious, and when they did try to get, in quotes, arty, it was worse than stupid rock and roll." In a later interview, Reed maintained his position, rejecting his previous claim that the Beatles were the most incredible songwriters ever. In another interview, Reed said his band, the Velvet Underground, was on a completely different level than its contemporaries. The interviewer followed by asking what he thought of John Lennon and the Beatles. Speaking to Joe Smith, he barely contained his bemusement, adding, "The Beatles? I never liked the Beatles, I thought they were garbage. I don't think Lennon did anything until he went solo. But then too, he was like trying to play catch-up. He was getting involved in choruses and everything. I don't want to come off as being snide, because I'm not being snide, what I'm doing is giving you a really frank answer. I have no respect for those people at all. I don't listen to it at all, it's absolute shit."